There isn't an author in the world who doesn't bring a big part of himself into everything that he writes. The characters, the settings, the kind of plots that he chooses to write. It's all based on who he is and the defining experiences of his own life. There are few experiences in life, few rites of passage, at least in modern society that we have, that are more defining than the military. Now, if you've been following the channel for a long time, you know that I, the nonsense-free editor, am a former U.S. Marine. Although I wasn't in for very long, it was a huge part of my life, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that my very short time in the Marine Corps is a big part of the reason why I am the way I am today. The same can be said for author BR Keid, who lit the military sci-fi world on fire with his premiere book. Military sci-fi is a unique subgenre within the sci-fi world. And because the military aspect of it is kind of its defining feature, you can't really fake it. It has to be real. Not all military sci-fi authors are veterans, but BR Keid is, and like myself, he was in the United States Marine Corps. And in today's interview, I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to BR Keid, introduce you to the world that he created, and give you a little insight into why it is so viscerally real and wonderful. It'll probably come through in the interview, but I highly recommend his books. So without further ado, please enjoy the interview. I would say that the people who read your series are very fortunate because as an editor, I get all kinds of works. Yours absolutely blew me away, not just in how good it was, but as a former Marine, I was reading it. I just felt like I was back in. So obviously,
mission accomplished. Very
yes,
good.
you enjoyed your time in the Marine Corps. So tell us about that. What made you join? What did you do while you were there? Take us through the lore, the military lore for.
Absolutely. No, so I was a kid born in flyover country. My folks have a cattle ranch down in the Ozarks, the Arkansas side of the Ozarks. I was a rural kid, lived hours from the nearest metropolitan area. And it was always probably going to happen, but I was very fortunate. My grandfather was actually a World War II Marine. He served on Iwo Jima. And so we got the lore, as you put it, introduced to us very early on. And so by the time I was 17, which is when I enlisted, because I remember still to this day, my parents having to sign because I wasn't quite 18 yet. It was just never a question. I was going to enlist. I was going to join the Marines like my grandfather and just try to do the right thing and serve my country. And so that's what got me in. And from there, it was a bit of an adventure. Obviously, the Marines is a lot different than building tents and rustling cattle every day. But I grew up extra fast there. I went to boot camp in San Diego, recruit depot. So a little bit more hills maybe than you were accustomed to, but not quite as many sand fleas. It's all good. We won't hold that against each other. And honestly, I was a radio operator with a weapons company. So I got the best of, or the worst, as it were, of both worlds. I was both not an O3, and yet I lived and slept and worked with O3s all the time. And so when I wasn't carrying a radio or batteries, I was usually carrying ammo or other things that people a lot bigger than me would cajole me into carrying. And then there was the occasional time that I would be posted as a like a platoon commander or even the company commander's RO. And that was always interesting because those guys, I always felt like they were like 2 feet taller than me. And so keeping up was always something. So again, I got to do something mildly technical and still watch a lot of shit blow up a lot, which was really cool. And occasionally pull the trigger, which was pretty cool. Did deploy to Iraq in 2004. When I think about the military, it's hard to think about anything but that time. And certainly with my writing, it is the most vibrant's not the right word, but it is the most intense, the most detailed memories and experiences that really are the fuel for a big portion of my writing.
Absolutely. And there's nothing else like it, and it's hard to fake. And that's unique with military sci-fi because it's not just sci-fi, it's military sci-fi. And so I have found, at least from my own clientele and from when I read just on my own time, a lot of veterans, even if they were only in for 4 years, even if they never deployed, you cannot fake that. And military sci-fi readers, what has been your experience? Because obviously, I'm sure you hear not just from the Amazon reviews, but I'm sure people get in touch with you through your newsletter. What would you find other than the realism that struck me so much? What do your readers say about you and the worlds that you've created that really resonates with you as a veteran?
Probably the highest praise is around just, and this sounds a little wooey, but that I'll describe it as seeing themselves in the work, which I think part comes with the realistic feel. But more than that, it's just we've all had those really bad days or those really good days. We know what they feel like. And to see that, and there's all kinds of walks of life that can experience this in a good book, but specific to military sci-fi, I think it's seeing themselves in the experience portrayed on the page, which is an extra bonus for me because yes, it's military, but it's also sci-fi. So if I can drop you 1,000 light years and 500 years in the future and it still feels familiar, that's, I think, says shot on target, as they say.
So why did you join the Marines instead of other services? Just because you're your grandfather or
Yeah, really, that was it. Every time we spoke, he always spoke about the Marines like it were something sacred, like it was a privilege for him to be a part of. It's hard to put into words, but he just oozed that. He took it all very seriously. He's like the editor of his division newsletter in his retirement years. And so he just lived it and breathed it as much as he could. And so it was just never a question for me. At 17, I was aware of the other branch, but it was just not, there was no path to get there. It was just like, yeah. It was like, okay, there's a lot of jobs in the Marines. Which one am I going to do?
I think it's that mission aspect because I was the same way. I was 17 when I joined, and this was in the late 90s, so it's peacetime.
Mhm.
And everyone wanted to talk about college. Oh, here's your college package. We're going to send you to college. I'm like, I have good grades. I can go to college now. The Marines was like, all right, let me tell you what it means to be a Marine. And they were
Yep,
not
that's
playing
right.
around. And I was just like, this is where I want to be. Even if with those ugly alpha uniforms, I will swallow that because this is where I want to be.
Yeah, I remember thinking back to like boot camp. So I was so gung ho to join the Marines, and again, I grew up on a ranch. I was used to hard work, and I thought, how hard can this be? And 2 weeks in, I was like, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I am not where I belong. And this is again for a lot of folks who were like, I was never a big sports jock or anything like that growing up. I just carried heavy things around. But I remember the first time I climbed the rope to the top, and that was the attitude. Again, something so simple, and like they're yelling at you the whole time, emotionally and mentally abusing you and physically, and yet it still inspires. Like it's it's funny to think about in retrospect, but like I'll never forget when that shifted for me, and it was like I'm where I belong. This is absolutely it. Not because I just did that, but because I know I can do it again. And that was the rest. That was the rest of boot camp for me. So it was, and the rest of my deployment. And again, you can learn. There's a lot of different tracks in the School of Hard Knocks. The Marines is just one of those, but you can't pay for that education.
I remember when for the Crucible, that final hike, and not just me, but a lot of us, our feet were just hamburger and that whatever that
Yeah.
stuff they put on that just makes it feel like acid. But you still have to walk the 5 miles, and it doesn't
Yep.
matter. Every step hurts you, but you can do hard things. Even if every single second of it is painful, you can still do it. And I think it's that then when you go out in the civilian world, yeah, it's a desk job and it sucks, but is it worse than stepping on pussy blisters on the bottom of your feet for five
Definitely
miles?
not. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Am I enjoying this? No. Is it the easiest thing or is it the hardest thing I've ever done? Absolutely not. No, you're talking about the Crucible. Since I'm bragging on my grandfather, I gotta share one more story. Yeah, I had a similar kind of Crucible moment where we're going up I won't repeat the name, but it's got a very special name for that particular hill in the Camp Pendleton, California. But you're going up this hill, and it's the last hours of the Crucible, and the hill is the last thing you do. But we got to the top, and I'm standing next. We're all in formation. We look like bags of ass, and we're just trying to stand up straight. And you know what's coming because you can hear. And these are, I say, grown men. A lot of them. I was 17, but men and boys who spent the last 13 weeks just like stretching every limit, everything they could possibly thought they could do, and double that, triple that. And you just hear the tears breaking out. it's when you get your eagle globe and anchor. That is like the symbol of a Marine. It is what you've been working for, is the embodiment the of all that. A little talisman that represents what you've been through, what you're becoming a part of. And he's getting his issued and he's holding it together pretty good. But then, of course, your drill instructor comes to face you and you're there. You are alert in that moment. And he starts talking, but he's saying words that he was not saying to the other people. And I'm catching like maybe 50% of it. And then I see that he's holding a very old, like a little ring box. And he starts talking about legacy and family and all this stuff. And then he opens it up and there's a little note from my grandfather at the top of this ring box. And it's his Eagle Globe and Anchor from 1943. I begin sobbing just a lot. And Harrison next to me loses it just because he's right there. He's part of the conversation. He just starts to lose it. And we're just sobbing. It's hilarious. And so anyway, that's just, people are just like, I guess Marines cry a lot. No, I guess the point is just being a part of something special, and the legacy there, I think, is something we carry. And I know the other services have their version of that, but man,
I don't think they do, because the Marines, like, they make a point. No, I'm not calling you by your rank because you don't rate. You don't get to wear that
That's right.
on your uniform until you get it. And then you can iron it on your uniform. The other services don't do that, I'm pretty sure. They call us recruit. You're not a private because you don't rate to be a private. So
that's right.
Having your drill instructor who's been screaming what a piece of shit you are for 13 weeks is the one to give it to you.
Yeah.
That really matters.
And then you're a Marine. You're not a recruit, and like you've almost got to rewire your brain because you've been less than scum for
less than nothing
a long time.
It was funny. I remember when we first got, and they make you do the piss test. And for most of us, it's probably the first time you've ever had to drop trow in front of a stranger. Yep. And it's funny because a lot of the girls were trying to do the hover. I don't know if men do that in public restrooms, but women don't want to sit on the toilet. They want to hover. And our drill instructor, the forming drill instructor, was like, sit your ass on that toilet. It was cleaned by a Marine, so you know it's clean. We don't have recruits clean these toilets. And that should have let us know what the future held for us.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Just in case you wonder where you rank right now. Yeah.
Yep. It's like you're going to become a master in janitorial sciences.
That's right. That's right.
And I never forgot Simple Green. So once you got out of active duty, what did that path look like to what you're doing now? And it is a gear shift. So is that hard for you when you got out of the Marines, where you're a civilian now, people are calling you by your first name? And I remember it was jarring, just the way you talk to a stranger who's in the civilian world versus you talk to another Marine that you just happen to have never met before. Like, how was that for you?
Absolutely. No, it was definitely a gear shift for me. And I actually got out immediately after my deployment, within months of my demobilizing from Iraq. And so I was working through a lot more than just adjusting to civilian life, but just adjusting to a non-combat environment. I was fortunate we were at the beginning of the realization that veterans weren't getting enough support for that, because when I went to Iraq in 2004, that was the beginning of the insurgency. So it wasn't the sort of major ass whooping we gave to Saddam in 2003. It was something else. It was unexpected. It was guerrilla. It was dirty. And that, a lot of that unknown is, at least for me, was like a source of a lot of the trauma. But again, I was fortunate because they were seeing that as they come out. So I had support, and both in adjusting to civilian life, but then also dealing with that, with those issues. So it took a lot of time. But again, there's a lot of folks who came before me that didn't get any support, or perhaps wasn't even recognized that it should be an issue. So.
Yeah. I remember when I got out, they gave me 30% disability with no questions, and I never deployed. This is for migraines. This is for repeated ankle breaks just from regular training. And then behind me, we have Iraq war veterans with burns and missing limbs that have to fight to get 20%. And that was just such an outrage. And it was state dependent, because in Kansas, it was fine because I guess there are fewer of us, but in states like Nevada, California, some of the East Coast states, they were just like, oh, your face got burned off 10%. Like, it was outrageous. And I'm glad it's not fixed, obviously, but I know there were major changes like around 08, 09, where they were getting their shit together.
Absolutely. So I was a big computer nerd growing up, and I got into software engineering right out of the Marine Corps. Got my associate's degree on the GI Bill and never looked back, and was very fortunate to have a number of lucky starts early on where someone would look at a kid like me and be like, yeah, he might do a good job, and just had a chance to show it. And again, just to brag on all veterans for a bit. There's something to be said, and not picking on anyone who's only been in the corporate world. Veterans have a certain experience that I would say your day-to-day problems tend to look small in comparison. And for better or for worse, I was always the guy who raised my hand, like, I'll do that. And so enough years of doing that, and now I'm in the consulting world, helping big companies build big projects with big budgets. And yeah, and so again, I have space in my life now for this amazing passion for writing.
And you still, I seem to recall, you live on an active farm now, right? So you're not like in the big
That's
city.
right. That's right. No, I'm about an hour from the nearest major metro now, and my wife and I have a very small, I call it a farmstead. It's nothing like my parents' size, but it's enough to we sell grass-fed, grass-finished beef to the local community, which is enough to keep the grass mowed without spending money on diesel. So no, we love it. I both in software and in writing, it is a very intangible job. Lots of hands on keyboard, but other than that, you're spending all your time up here. The need to get out and stretch your legs and work your muscles is pretty significant. And it also gives me just enough space for a little shooting range. So I haven't quite rusted on my rifle qual.
That is the good thing about living in the country and then working with animals. And I've never worked on a farm, so I don't know how mindless it is, but I remember I got some of the best ideas for the books that I would end up writing when I was on a working party. We were at the Target factory, and it was just put the glue down, put the goddamn
Yep.
target on, next one.
That's
And it's
right.
just that
That's right.
mindless work where I'm like, I should write a book about traveling back in time. Have you found that your experience by working on a farm?
Absolutely. I'll pick on you for a second. Mindless isn't the right term, but it is a very, actually, probably is a good term. Your brain is not the thing engaged. You're doing a repetitive activity over and over. One of the biggest ones, I love tractor time when it's come time to like brush hog the pasture or whatever. And you're just literally sitting going round and round and round. And it's pretty mindless. And yeah, just that frees up the mental processor to like, oh, hey, this is a good idea.
And I know some people say, yeah, when I'm in the car, I never put the radio on because I want that to come. And I'm just driving has never been that for me, but it's always been like, I'm going to do the dishes or I'm going to mop the floor. I'm going to feed cattle. I can imagine that's
That's right.
something where
That's
you
right.
don't need your creativity.
I occasionally get good ideas doing the dishes, but most of it's outside.
It's very cleansing. So, as far as getting started, so you're a software engineer, you're working in computers. What did that look like getting the books written and then getting the word out, letting people know that it existed? What did that look like?
Sure. So first I had the idea, and I got to give full credit to my youngest son. We were on a road trip, and he's a huge nerd. He comes by it honest. And so we were having a moment on this 4 or 5 hour road trip. And we started talking about movies we loved, alien invasion movies, and I said, the problem with all those is, right, is like we would lose. If they're good enough to come here, like travel vast distances to come here, like we're not winning that. And that, I don't know why, but for some reason that concept just would not go away. I would wake up thinking about it, go to bed thinking about it. And from there I just started writing, which I actually do not encourage. I wrote a lot of garbage before I ever wrote anything good. I guess it was the one benefit to that, both with my Marine and my startup experience. I'm definitely a go-getter entrepreneur type. And so I definitely learned by doing. And so that worked for me. I probably would have shaved a year or two off if I'd have just read a couple of good books or took a course or reached out to someone like you sooner. But so I actually have two unpublished novels that are basically the origin story for my current universe that I will return to in time. But that was what I needed to figure out. Oh, there's a story structure, and I'm not writing a movie. There's internality here that matters. And that's why people read books and all of that. And from then it was just, again, I've got a full-time job and a farm. And so finding time to write, again, I'm blessed with a partner who supports that. Anything as long as I don't talk to her about it.
I hear
Okay,
that
good. That sounds
so
great.
often where men specifically who whatever they write, their wives are like, no, I don't care. I don't want to hear about
Yeah.
it. Just
Yeah.
go when you're
I think
right.
that's great. I don't care. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Wonder why that my husband's the opposite. He's just like, what are you writing? What's it about? Does the guy die? Like he's so invested. Like he loves my
That's a
villain and
good
he doesn't
man.
want me to kill
That's a
him.
good man. He knows. Yeah, yeah. That's the right answer. No, and so yeah, just understanding story structure, understanding all that, and then just finding time for the words and having written, even though they weren't good, like two complete novels was really the reason I was able to finish the one and be like, okay, this is much better than those. I think I have a thing here. I've got a story to tell, and there's a broader universe arc to follow.
Definitely. So now I had previously behind my paywall written an article about how you launched because a lot of people, men in particular, they're like, I don't want to get on camera. I don't want to do TikToks. I can't sell books successfully if I don't do this one very specific way of publicizing it. But you didn't do any of that. Correct. You didn't do TikTok dances.
Nope.
You don't even have a YouTube channel, but you are selling gangbusters and your reviews are fantastic and you're not even really that active on Twitter. So how did you go from, hello, I am quiet introvert person with no TikTok dancing, to I'm selling my series really well? So what did that process look like?
I had a couple of, without like advertising for any particular group here. I took a course that I found valuable at the time that had some pretty specific instructions on how to proceed, and I'll lay out what I did. I had a what folks call a reader magnet, which is just a free shortish story. I have trouble with short, but a free story that you could get for signing up for my newsletter. And so I had essentially a 4 to 5 month window where I was giving away 20,000 words for free, which was a prequel to the story I was going to launch in April. I had a couple of things going for me too. So I wish I could say it was all skill, but I think there was luck too. This was beginning of 2023. So COVID was definitely on the downturn, but it was still a thing. And so I think people were a lot more tuned into, I'll sign up for an email or I'll read this book because I don't want to go outside or whatever. And so I was getting the kind of tailwind from that. And so I had a small but mighty mailing list before I ever launched. And so then I launched Intrusion Protocol, which is the first book in the Autonomous Weapons Division series. I really loved long, complicated titles at the time. I'm working on it. But I launched it on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, April Fools 2023. So people were primed to the universe, primed to the main character. And I think I just got enough traction to juice the algorithms enough to be like, oh, this is working out. I was also fortunate because since I had that big window, I was mostly done with the second book within a couple of months of that launch. And so I turned around, like that was April, and book two came out in September. And so I think that, at the time, with the kind of groundswell I'd already built, was what gave me a lot of the inertia I've been running on since. The third book, Broken Gods, took a little bit longer to get out than I wanted to, and that shows. But so I'm looking to reproduce that kind of model with this next series, meaning that at least the first two books are going to come out together and they will almost certainly launch in Kindle Unlimited. The other thing I'm planning on doing that I did not do the first time around is I want to do audio at the same time. So it's not you get the book and then 2 or 3 months later it's the audio. No, you get every format on day one to really keep that momentum too.
That's a good idea. Do you keep your books in Kindle Unlimited or just that first 90-day period?
That's a good question. I only just recently, at the start of 2025, took Autonomous Weapons Division out of Kindle Unlimited. Again, just for kind of fellow authors or new authors that may be watching, the advertising landscape has changed considerably in the last 6 months.
Mhm.
They're always tweaking their algorithms, so that's probably a big part of it. Large language models, AI has introduced where there were always no shortage of self-published books. We've now been inundated with self-published books. And so that just impacts the effectiveness of your advertising. I don't write to market. I try to be close enough to that to have something to advertise with. And while the Autonomous Weapons Division story is very important to this universe, I anticipate that this next series will be a little bit easier to, not so much to sell, but to advertise. And we'll see about that.
You did take longer with Broken Gods, and that was probably also my fault because I drag my feet and I take forever. But Broken Gods, which is the third book in the series, was a little bit different because in the first two, it was very character, very combat oriented, just that wonderful sci-fi, Marine Corps, everything that I got in the first book, I got double in the second book. But the third book had that extra added element of it where it posed the idea of, hey, you know, all those myths and religions that you think are stupid because you're an atheist and you're just above all that nonsense. Oh, yeah, by the way, all that crap's true, just so you know. And that, of
Yeah.
course, with my lore coming from, do I become a nun or do I become a Marine, which is so weird.
Mhm.
So it's like that intersection of duty to country and wanting to serve, and then religion too. Was that just a natural outgrowth, or was there something in your background where you wanted to infuse religion in there, or just like bringing Carrie around to viewing the world in a bigger way?
Oh man, how much time you got? No, so I think that, yeah, that's a really good question. I was raised Catholic. Well, I have a very religious background. Full disclosure, I'm not terribly religious now, although I am probably awfully spiritual. Again, I always took issue with the idea that there's no atheists in foxholes, but man, it gives you a whole new perspective on what's important. Like, I'm not a big fantasy reader, but made up religions are huge in fantasy, and I always enjoyed them in sci-fi. There's some really good sci-fi out there with just made up religions that it's fascinating, and doesn't have to be a religious story, but it's just more flavor for the world. It just makes it feel very real, very lived in. And so I was always going to do that. And then because people just don't know this because these other two books aren't published yet, but there's actually in this universe there's a history, there's a start to this religion and kind of an end too that I hope to cover in fiction. And so the third book was always going there. Now I think there's certain readers of mine will appreciate that. For you, it was a bit of a surprise, and it was a surprise for them too. And I'll own that, as in, I think a better storyteller, it would have been less of a sudden right turn and more of a gentle curve. So we're feedback received, and I'm working on it. It was always going there. I could have gone there a little bit gentler, but the other thing with Sev and his particular abilities in this universe is that things for him are very mental, very, I don't know, it's all in your head. And so when he comes face to face with this truth, it is very in his face or in his head, which again, for a reader thinking, oh, this is sci-fi, I'm safe from all that. It might be like, what?
I don't think and it's not unheard of. Now, for me growing up after X-Men, the animated series and the comic books, Deep Space Nine supplanted that, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And the fact that they wove
One
in,
of the best,
well,
for the record.
yes. And part of that, I think, is the existence of the prophets, who are
Yep,
nonlinear extraterrestrial beings that this one particular
that's right.
planet worships as gods. And so
That's right.
I don't think that they're necessarily at odds. And I think there are a lot of quote unquote atheists who say, okay, if the events of the Bible did happen, it's just meddling extraterrestrials. So
Sure,
I
sure.
don't even think it's really outside the scope of science fiction. And I love when those two things come together. And I think you did it
Yep.
very skillfully, and especially with the way the plot went. Seb was thrown for a loop. So it made sense that the reader would be too, oh, this is a whole new thing that we're doing. And one thing I'm enjoying, and this is also a criticism that Star Trek got, at least I think the Next Generation, was you would have a whole planet, and that whole planet would be a monoculture. I didn't realize that humanity was so dwindling. There's like less than 1 million humans left, and they're dispersed. And you've made each of the colonies, they have their own ways. Some are more religious,
Sure.
some are more athletic, some are more poverty stricken, some are more desert, and they usually have different skin tones, and it makes sense. Did you use any particular template for setting up these different cultures for them, or just looked at the geography and made decisions from there?
I think really I started with geography. I had a feel for the worlds, and I have somewhere written like a very brief history of the 500 years of the three colonies. And so that was like my input, right? This is the geography, the climate, how remote or not you are. This is when you were settled by who and why. And then fast forward, okay, what do you like? So it's not like I wish I could say it was more well thought out than that, but it really wasn't. But again, I try to just operate within those limits. Okay, here's the facts as they're known. Would this apply or not? And it's been a lot of fun. That's actually in the first series, we are never on the ground. We're never planet side. And vast majority of characters we interact with are military.
Now, one thing I loved, and I can't remember, I think it was book two, where you had a very subtle call out to Bill Paxton's "Game Over, Man" from Alien. There, anybody
Yeah,
who's seen
yeah.
that movie, I was like, I know what that is. I loved it. So, what is there anything like from your real service that you, not necessarily a one-to-one, but is there any like event that you experienced that you were like, oh, that's going in the book? Absolutely.
Yeah, so it not so much in the first series, but when I was stationed in Al Qaeda, Iraq, there sandstorms were a thing. They happened. They weren't super common, but they were regular. and we were on an overwatch position in the middle of nowhere, probably 2 or 3 kilometers from the gate. And all of a sudden, you just see what looks like a massive sandstorm on the horizon. But as it gets closer, we realize it's not a sandstorm; it's just a massive camel stampede.
Oh.
It had to be thousands of these animals just kicking up dust for forever. And so I'm gonna it's not gonna be camels, obviously, but we're gonna work a critter stampede in at some point. Like, again, just things come up that are something hilarious somebody said. The goal is for the world to feel real, to feel lived in, not researched or planned. And so I'm always on the lookout for something like that.
Yeah, you do a really good job. And it's nice just to hear those terms because I've been out for a really long time. And so every now and again, there will be a line of dialogue like, oh my God, I forgot about that until now. So
Yeah.
that's always a good
Yeah.
experience to just read that and remember.
Yeah, Bresto does more than his share of hazing. All to the betterment of his Marines, of course. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not sorry I missed out on some of that. I knew some
it's
people,
true.
they had permanent holes.
Oh yeah.
They
Oh
just
yeah.
never healed. I'm like, ugh. Not
Still
sorry I
ache every
missed
now
that.
and then. Yeah.
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 And I never got the blood stripe either. So again, not sorry.
Yeah. There's a couple Marines in the audience just really getting all this. The rest of them think we're crazy.
No, it's funny, and maybe it's because of who I follow on Twitter, but there's a lot of guys who either they were in other services or even if they weren't in at all, it's like they know these little things just because Marines always talk about them. And somehow, even though we're the smallest service,
Mhm.
everybody knows who we are and we want to talk about it. And so I think
Yeah.
generally people know and they know that we take running the most seriously for some reason, and the Air Force is not. One of the authors that I interviewed previously and reviewed his book, he was like, yeah, Kristen, she's great. I think she was in the Air Force. I'm like, sir, don't put
Record
that on the
scratch.
internet.
Yeah.
I'm gonna dox you. So in terms of military sci-fi, it's like, do you still read it just for yourself, just for
Oh
fun?
yeah.
Or
I think, and you asked like the origin story. I think there was the car ride with my kid, which was 90% of it. But I definitely both read military sci-fi that I really liked, and also some that was like, this just doesn't hit.
Mhm.
And of course, me having a giant ego was like, I can do better than this. This is easy, not easy. But but it was a reason to get off my ass and put hands on keyboard. Yeah, no, I still read it. I think the last like series I finished was I was very late to the Expanse. I actually caught the show before I caught the books, and but am loving the books. I think this is I'm not bragging on myself here. I like them a lot because the style feels familiar to mine. There's the authors behind James S. A. Corey. They have a again great action, great storytelling. If both the big and the small. The hard science is great with just enough rule of cool to keep things interesting. But then the military side is familiar and believable. So I really like that. But again, there's a lot of interiority to their characters. It's
Mhm.
not, and I'm not picking on anybody here, but it's not uncommon, I think, in my genre to have not no interiority, but just the interiority is not as nuanced. You tend to you tend to have your certain kind of characters, the badass who never screws up, the goof who's always wrong or whatever, and that's fine. And those characters are great. But I probably spend more time. We're not talking YA levels of navel gazery, but I probably spend more time in my characters' heads than the average indie military sci-fi author, and that's just my style of storytelling. It's not what one's right and one's wrong. That's just my style. There's as much action inside the mind as outside, whether or not you've got an implant. And yeah.
Yeah, and that's good for pacing because especially when you're having those extended battles, having that moment where you could just take a breath and, okay, what am I going to do when the war is over if I live? That's always nice to have those little moments of interiority and remembering that these are all people. And if they die, it's sad. It's a tragedy, even if you just met them. So I like that part of your books. And I haven't read the Expanse books, but I watched the show and the best sci-fi. And for me, watching The Expanse, I should clear up the mystery. It's like if you ever thought that Star Wars, for instance, was sci-fi instead of fantasy, watch The Expanse and tell me if your opinion changes.
Right.
Because then it's, oh, that's how it works in space. Okay. And
Yeah.
Star
Yeah. Yeah.
Wars is about magic. Okay. All right. I understand the difference now.
Yeah. It's a really good. That's a really good point, and I think one thing about military sci-fi is, so I've already mentioned the rule of cool. As long as what you're doing makes sense for the story, makes sense for the plot, makes sense for the characters and where they are, and it's not literally just I just contrived a thing to solve this scene. Rule of cool is where it's at, because quite frankly, the laws of physics don't look real good for vast galactic spanning empires, and that's what we want to write about. We've got to play fast and loose with that. But so I always like to say my military sci-fi anyway is a little soft on science but hard on military, and I think that's probably true of like most good military sci-fi. Is you're going to have FTL, you're going to have some kind of artificial gravity, you're going to have things that we don't quite know how they work yet, shields, blasters, all these things. Again, those are, most of those are just engineering problems. but but your rank structure, your force structure, your tactics, your strategies, the relationship between ranks, like those things need to be real. And that, whereas like a hard sci-fi fan will throw the book down the minute you introduce some kind of techno magic, a military sci-fi reader, the minute the officer is palling around with the private, this is ridiculous, right? Yeah.
I always joke you can tell when the author is an Air Force vet because he's got everybody calling each other by their first names, even officers, and listed them like
Yeah.
you pack of assholes.
Yeah. No, there's so few first names in my book. It's like sometimes I have to go back and look them up. What's his name again?
Because it almost doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It
My
does not
roommate
matter.
from Okinawa, her last name isn't even the same anymore. But I and her current husband still call her by her maiden last name because that's her name. I'm so
That's
sorry.
right. That's right. Yeah. And that's just one of those fun things. Like I probably, I don't even know that I knew my roommates' first names. But it's from a storytelling perspective, it's neat that some of those details are kept in reserve, because that is just fuel for another kind of moment of growth. Oh yeah, there's this whole other person to you I don't know.
So if another veteran wants to become an independently published author, what would you say to him in terms of just the writing journey and or publishing?
I would say that first, just start writing. I know I said not to do that earlier. That was a joke. Sorry, folks. It's as good as the jokes get. But do make sure you like it. Make sure you enjoy putting words on page, because that's what a lot of it is. And if you can't do that, you've got nothing to sell, which is the other side of this. You've got to be comfortable selling yourself. Even if you're not as maybe super outspoken as me, there's still strategies to get the word out, and strategies to find your readers. And because that's the whole point of marketing, is just to find your readers, find your tribe. And so as long as you like putting words on page and like writing for your tribe, doesn't have to be right to market, but writing for the readers you want, you'll do great. Do get a book or a course on story structures, things like that. We're not writing movies, we're writing internal and external journeys, and there's a manual for that. So do that. But yeah, I think just get started. Microsoft Word is everywhere, or whatever. Just grab you a laptop and start telling your story, because you should tell it.
Yes, I agree. Awesome. So as we wrap up, where should I direct people? Obviously, we want them to buy your books, all of them, because they're awesome. Anything else?
Thank you, Kristen. No, so check out brkeid.com, brkeid.com. It's all there. If you're a veteran or not, shoot me an email. Let me know what kind of sci-fi you like. I'll let you know if I've got something for you. And stay tuned. Hard Drop is coming any month now. It's going to be great.
I hope everybody reads it. And I think that I have an astonishing number of veterans. Obviously, they've been out for a long time, and then the younger men are finding my channel as well. And a lot of them are just like, I was going to join, but then the administration. So even though they didn't ever get around to joining, there is that yearning for purpose, I think, in young men. And so they really love military sci-fi. And hopefully with different policies, they will take that adventure and not lose limbs with it. So, because
that's right.
Definitely important part of my life. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this. This is great.
No, thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate you.